On Halloween night, in a resort surrounded by woods, I saw a man who wasn't wearing a costume. I think he was waiting for the one night of the year when the dead are allowed to walk, so he could finally find his. My name is Ethan, and when I was 13, my parents made a decision that, in hindsight, feels like the start of everything. Instead of our usual trick-or-treating in our neighborhood in Salem, Massachusetts, we drove 2 hours north to a family-friendly Halloween resort in rural New Hampshire. It was one of those sprawling, rustic places with a main lodge, a dozen log cabins, and a dark, cold lake, all surrounded by an ocean of dense, black pine forest. The resort was going all out. Fake cobwebs draped over everything, grinning jack-o'-lanterns on every porch, and the constant smell of wood smoke and candy apples in the air. I was at that awkward age where I felt too old for costume contests, but still young enough to be genuinely thrilled by the promise of a haunted hayride. My parents, seeing me mope, gave me $20 and told me to go explore the game booths and arcade in the main lodge while they checked in. It was there I met another kid, Leo, who was staying in the cabin next to ours. We bonded over our mutual disdain for the cheap magic show in the lobby and made a plan to conquer the haunted hayride later that night. As dusk settled, the resort transformed. Orange lights flickered to life, and employees dressed as zombies and ghouls began to roam the grounds, making kids scream and laugh. It was perfect. At 7 p.m., Leo and I lined up for the main event, the haunted hayride. We all piled onto a large wagon filled with hay bales, pulled by a tractor driven by a man in a scarecrow mask. The ride plunged into the woods on a narrow dirt trail, illuminated only by the occasional tiki torch. It was exactly what you'd expect. Zombies jumping out from behind trees, fake chainsaws roaring, werewolves howling in the distance. I was laughing and shoving Leo when the tractor slowed to a crawl in a particularly dark stretch of the trail. The woods here were thicker, swallowing the torchlight. I glanced off to the side, away from the costumed actors, and my blood ran cold. Standing just beyond the reach of the light, partially hidden behind a massive oak, was a man. He wasn't in costume. He wore a simple dark wool coat, old-fashioned trousers, and a flat cap, like a farmer from the 1940s. He was just standing there, hands in his pockets, motionless, watching the hay wagon pass. He wasn't part of the show, he was an observer. As I stared, I felt him lock eyes with me. Even in the gloom, I could see his face was pale, his expression of profound, agonizing sorrow. I nudged Leo, but before he looked, the tractor had turned a corner and the man was gone. The rest of the ride felt hollow. I couldn't shake the image of that man. When we got back to the main lodge, I tried to forget him. Leo and I grabbed snacks and joined the crowd around a massive bonfire. That's when I saw him again. He was standing at the far edge of the celebration, near the dark tree line that marked the boundary of the resort, just watching. Not the kids, not the bonfire. He was staring intently at the main lodge, as if waiting for someone to come out. I pointed him out to Leo, who squinted and said, "Weird, maybe he's just a local." But the man wasn't a local. He was completely out of place, a black and white photograph in a world of color. Later that night, around 10 p.m., the bonfire was dying down, and parents were dragging their kids back to their cabins. But Leo and I were still buzzing. We decided to take one last walk around the small, dark lake before calling it a night. The fog was rolling in, thick and cold, making the cabins on the far side look like fuzzy, glowing boxes. The only sound was our own footsteps crunching on the gravel path. "Bet you won't touch the old boathouse," Leo dared, pointing to a dark, dilapidated structure at the far end of the lake, away from the lights of the resort. Of course I had to. We walked the perimeter of the lake, our flashlights cutting weak beams through the fog. As we approached the boathouse, I saw a shape. Sitting on the end of the rickety dock, his legs dangling over the black water, was the man in the wool coat. He was perfectly still, staring out at the center of the lake. We froze. He hadn't heard us. We were about to back away when he spoke, his voice clear and heartbreakingly sad in the cold night air. "Are you here?" he asked the water. "Did you come back tonight?" He turned his head, slowly, as if he knew we were there all along. His face, now clear in the fog, was slicked with tears. "Have you seen her?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm looking for my daughter. She went for a swim. In October." My stomach twisted. I didn't know what to say. Before I could answer, a piercing scream echoed across the lake. A woman's shriek, coming from the main lodge. The man's head snapped toward the sound. "It's her!" he cried, scrambling to his feet. He ran, not towards us, but at the lake, sprinting off the end of the dock and disappearing into the black, freezing water with a splash that seemed too small. We screamed for help. We ran back to the lodge, finding my parents, who called security. They swept the lake with floodlights. They found nothing. No man, no body. The next morning, I told the resort manager what I saw. The manager, a kind older woman, went pale. She told me the resort had a dark history. In the 1940s, a man had stayed in one of the cabins with his young daughter. On Halloween night, she had wandered off, and they believed she had fallen into the lake and drowned. Her body was never recovered. The father, consumed by grief, returned to the resort every Halloween, pacing the woods, staring at the lake, waiting for her. He did this for 20 years, until he too disappeared from that very dock, presumed to have finally joined her. The police report from that night did confirm a scream. A guest in the lodge had woken from a nightmare, screaming. But was it a coincidence? Or did the man, the griever, as the staff called him, finally hear what he'd been waiting for? I don't know what I saw that night. A desperate trespasser, or a ghost trapped in a loop of grief, searching the woods on the one night of the year he believes his daughter can finally come home. All I know is that the supernatural isn't always about being scared. Sometimes it's about a sadness so deep it refuses to die.
They say Halloween is the one night the spirits of the dead can walk among the living, hidden by our costumes. But in my neighborhood, one of them lingers. And I think this year, it finally found what it was looking for. I live in Alexandria, Virginia, in one of the old historic districts. Halloween here isn't just a holiday, it's a performance. The entire neighborhood collectively agrees to become a ghost story for one night. We're talking professional fog machines piping mist over colonial-era cobblestone streets, gas lamps casting flickering, eerie glows, and a strict, unspoken, no inflatables rule. It's all about atmosphere. Last year, it was my turn to take my 7-year-old son, Ben, trick-or-treating. The night was perfect. The air was cold and smelled of burning leaves and damp earth. Ben was dressed as a tiny, adorable ghost, and I was just tired dad. We joined the throngs of other families, our bags filling quickly. The energy was electric, a perfect chorus of laughter and trick-or-treats. We were about an hour in, on a particularly dark, tree-lined street, when I first saw it. Across the road, standing in the deep shadow of a wrought iron fence, was another trick-or-treater. But this one, it was wrong. It was dressed in what looked like a simple, old-fashioned farmer's costume. Flannel shirt, overalls, and a crude burlap sack mask over its head with two dark, unblinking holes cut for eyes. The first thing that struck me was its height. It was tall, too tall to be a child, yet it stood with a child's stillness, perfectly motionless, its head tilted slightly as it watched us. It held no candy bag. It didn't move toward any of the houses. It just stood. "Dad, look at that costume," Ben whispered, pointing. "He's not moving." "He's just trying to scare people, buddy," I said, my voice more confident than I felt. "Come on, let's hit the next block." I took Ben's hand and pulled him along. But as we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling. I glanced back over my shoulder. The figure was gone. It hadn't walked away. It had simply vanished from the spot where it stood. We continued for another hour, the incident fading to the back of my mind, lost in the fun of Ben discovering the house that gave out full-sized candy bars. By 9 p.m., the streets were quieting down. The crowds were thinning as families took their tired kids home. We were heading back to our car, walking down a long, quiet street lit only by the flickering gas lamps. That's when I saw it again. On the far end of the street, standing directly under a pool of yellow light, was the same figure, the same burlap mask, the same flannel shirt, the same unnatural stillness. It was just standing there, waiting, its head turned directly toward us. There was no one else on the street. It was just us and it. "Dad, it's the Scarecrow Man again," Ben said, his voice small, his hand gripping mine tightly. "I see him, Ben. We're just going to walk right past to the car. Don't look at him," I whispered. My heart was a cold lump in my chest. This was not a coincidence. This was not a prank. We were being watched. We started walking, our footsteps echoing loudly on the empty sidewalk. We had to pass the intersecting street where it stood. As we got closer, I kept my eyes fixed forward, but I could feel its gaze on us. We crossed the intersection, and I finally risked a look down the street. It was gone. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Our car was just a block away, parked near the edge of a small, dark, wooded park that separated our historic district from the main road. The park was pitch black, a void in the middle of the charming neighborhood. As we approached the car, my hand fumbling in my pocket for my keys, Ben suddenly stopped dead. "Dad," he whispered, his voice trembling with real fear. "He's in the park." I looked. He was right. The figure was standing just inside the trees, not 10 feet away from us, almost completely hidden in the darkness. It was just a shape, a silhouette, but the burlap mask was unmistakable. It was waiting for us. And then it spoke. It wasn't a man's voice. It was a dry, papery whisper, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. And it said my son's name. "Ben," it hissed, "come play with me. We have games in the woods." That broke me. I grabbed Ben, threw him behind me, and hit the panic button on my key fob. The car alarm blared, slicing through the night. "Get back!" I screamed at the figure. "Get the hell away from us!" The figure didn't flinch. It didn't run. As the car lights flashed, illuminating it in strobes of red and white, it just tilted its head. A slow, curious, inhuman gesture. And then it moved. It didn't run. It skittered, moving sideways into the blackness of the park with a speed that didn't seem possible. It was there 1 second, and in the blackness between the flashing lights, it was gone. I threw Ben into his car seat, my hands shaking so badly I could barely buckle him in. I jumped into the driver's seat, jammed the key in the ignition, and peeled out, leaving the empty, foggy street behind us. Ben was silent the whole ride home. When we got inside, my wife took one look at our pale faces and knew something was wrong. I told her what happened, and we called the police. They sent a car to patrol the area, but of course, they found nothing. There was no man in a mask, no reports of a disturbance other than my car alarm. They chalked it up to a Halloween prankster taking things too far. But I knew what I saw. I knew what I heard. That thing was not human. We locked every door, every window, and I sat in the living room with Ben, who had fallen asleep on the couch, his plastic ghost costume still on. I sat there until dawn, just watching him. As the sun came up, my wife started emptying his candy bag onto the table to check it. "What's this?" she asked, holding something up. My blood turned to ice. In her hand was a small, crudely made doll. It was just 2 sticks tied together with twine with a tiny scrap of burlap tied around the top for a mask. It was identical to the figure in the woods. It was in Ben's bag. I had been with him every second. He never picked it up. He never accepted it from a stranger. It was just there. That thing in the woods, it hadn't just been watching. It hadn't just been luring. It had given him a gift, a token, an invitation. I don't know what the lingerer is, but I know it walks our streets every Halloween, and this year, it marked my son. When I bought my first house, the realtor told me about the good schools and the strong foundation. She never mentioned the specific dark rules for Halloween. I had to learn those the hard way. My name is Roger, and I was living alone in a small century-old house in a quiet neighborhood just outside Providence, Rhode Island. My girlfriend was visiting her parents for the Halloween weekend, leaving me to my own devices. The holiday, my favorite of the year, was exactly what I needed. The local families were charming, the kids' costumes were great, and the whole street had a festive, safe atmosphere. By 9 p.m., the last of the trick-or-treaters had vanished, and the street went quiet. I locked my doors, turned off the porch light, and settled on the couch to watch a horror movie, surrounded by a bowl of leftover candy. My night of peace was first interrupted around 10:30 p.m. A faint knock at the front door. I ignored it. It was clearly a Halloween prank, ding-dong ditch. I was used to it. I went back to my movie, but 15 minutes later, I heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. This time, it wasn't coming from the front door. It was coming from the back door, the one that led from my kitchen to the small, dark, fenced-in yard. That set every nerve in my body on high alert. Nobody ever uses that door. I muted the TV. The house fell into a dead, heavy silence. I listened, holding my breath, and then I heard it again. The unmistakable metallic rattle of the back doorknob being slowly, cautiously tested. I slid off the couch, staying low, and crept into the kitchen. My house is old, so
The kitchen has one of those small, diamond-shaped windows in the upper half of the back door. My heart was hammering. I slowly peeked through the glass. At first, all I saw was the darkness of my yard. Then my eyes adjusted. There was a man standing on my deck, but he was crouched down, his body low, as if he was trying to stay below the window line. He was wearing dark, ragged clothes. But the worst part was the mask. Earlier that day, while looking for a festive tablecloth in the attic, I had found an old trunk. Inside, among moth-eaten blankets, was a strange, 2-foot-tall, handmade doll. It was made of straw and burlap, wearing a tattered black cloak. Its face was a cracked, weeping porcelain mask. I thought it was just a creepy but cool vintage Halloween decoration and had placed it on my mantel. The thing on my back deck was wearing that exact mask. But this was not a 2-foot-tall doll. This was a 6-foot-tall man, his head covered by that same weeping porcelain face. As I watched, paralyzed, he stood up to his full, towering height and turned his head, staring directly at the window I was looking through. I didn't scream. I just ran. I sprinted to the living room, glanced at the mantel. The doll was gone. I ran up the stairs, my mind screaming, "It's not possible! It's not possible!" I locked myself in my bedroom and fumbled for my phone, dialing 911. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely press the numbers. As the dispatcher answered, I heard a sound from downstairs that made my blood run cold. The sound of glass cracking, then shattering. "He's breaking in!" I whispered frantically into the phone. "He's breaking the basement window!" The dispatcher told me officers were on their way, that I had to stay on the line and stay hidden. I hid in my bedroom closet, my back pressed against the wall, listening. The house was silent for a terrifyingly long minute. Then I heard him. He was inside. But it wasn't the sound of footsteps. It was a slow, heavy, dragging sound. A rhythmic thump, scrape. Thump, scrape, moving across the hardwood floor of the living room directly below me. It was the sound of something heavy being pulled. I was crying, trying to keep my breathing quiet, whispering updates to the dispatcher. The dragging sound stopped, directly at the bottom of the staircase. It knew where I was. I sat there frozen for what felt like an eternity. I could picture it standing there in the dark, that weeping mask staring up into the shadows of the stairwell, just waiting. Then, suddenly, the night outside erupted in flashing red and blue lights. The police were here. Headlights swept through the living room blinds, illuminating the entryway. I crept out of the closet, still on the phone, and peered over the staircase railing into the room below. The figure was there, standing motionless. It was holding a crowbar in one hand and a thick coil of rope and duct tape in the other. But it wasn't looking at me. It was staring intently at the small closet door under the stairs. As the police banged on the front door, the figure raised the crowbar and pointed it at the closet. The police yelled, "PD! Open the door!" The figure didn't move for a second. Then it dropped the crowbar, rope, and tape onto the floor with a loud clatter. It turned its head slowly, rotating it a full 180 degrees to look directly up at me on the landing. Then it just collapsed. It fell apart, disintegrating into a pile of straw, old rags, and dark cloth on the living room floor. When the police burst in, they found me shaking on the stairs, pointing to the pile. They saw the broken basement window, the tools on the floor. They concluded it was just an elaborate Halloween prank gone wrong. that a trespasser in a costume had broken in, heard the sirens, and fled out the back, leaving his costume behind to confuse me. But I know what I saw. As one of the officers was poking at the pile of rags with his flashlight, he found it, nestled in the straw, completely unharmed. The small, 2-foot-tall, weeping porcelain mask. I sold the house 6 months later. I did some research on its history, digging through old town records at the library. The house, built in the 1890s, was rumored to have been the site of a grisly, unsolved family murder. The legends claimed the spirits were violent, trapped. The neighbors, according to the records, had a tradition. Every Halloween, they would leave an offering, a sinner's doll, on the porch to appease whatever was inside, to keep it inside. When I moved in, I broke that tradition. I brought the doll into the house. I don't know what that thing was, or if it was trying to hurt me, but the tools, the crowbar, the rope, it wasn't looking at me when the police arrived. It was pointing them at the closet. I'm left with one horrifying thought that keeps me awake at night. What if that thing didn't break in to harm me? What if it was trying to get out?